Okay, I will call our administrative finance committee meeting of August 22nd to order. And note that both board members or all three committee members are here.
And Eric, I don't know if Eric and Melissa, have you met?
I don't.
Our recreation supervisor. She hasn't attended one of these meetings since you've been on the committee, so.
She likes to avoid them.
Volunteered.
Okay, so property tax allocation.
Yeah, let me provide just a little bit of background, just again, so the committee members are familiar with what we envisioned as this discussion. The committee members will recall that in the spring, amongst other topics, we brought you a revised or a new cost allocation plan for the administrative fund, which went through a couple iterations. That was incorporated into the district's fiscal year 23-24 budget. And the cost allocation plan at the committee's request was brought forward to be adopted, or it's adopted by the board and referenced in our strategic and financial policies. At the time it was considered by the board for adoption, the board of directors approved it on the condition or with the request that the admin and finance committee, as a result of the impacts from the updated cost allocation plan, that the finance and administration committee review the property tax allocation and consider whether or not it would be appropriate to make adjustments to that allocation for future years, fiscal year 24-25 and maybe beyond. So that's really why this agenda item was placed on this, or why this item was placed on the agenda. In order to provide you with sufficient background information, staff, we put together a few things that I wanted to walk you through. Make sure that you, again, just so you have this information. Let's see if I can make this bigger. So the first thing here, it's not directly on point, but in 2017, the district created a community facilities district. And we pursued this financial instrument to support primarily fire, but when the district was formed, it has a broader sense of possible purposes, not limited to just fire services, and could include parks maintenance and park services and et cetera, parks and recreation services, amongst other things. So it was written in a way that was fairly general in order to provide the district and the board of directors as much flexibility as possible. That community facilities district, when it was formed, didn't have any revenue associated with it. And how it really works is development projects that as of 2017 that didn't have all of their entitlements through the county would be subject to a request from Templeton CSD to annex into the CFD or otherwise satisfy the district's financial need. And so we knew there'd be kind of a lag, because projects that would be built right after that already had entitlements. And matter of fact, most of the projects that were under construction or were built like between 2008 and 2020 were projects that were originally entitled prior to the recession, like in 2007 and 8. Like it took 10 years before they actually got constructed. And that was not uncommon in California. There were state by state law maps got automatic extensions, and it took a long time before things actually happened. So with the CFD, the county has been cooperative and has required all developments that have come forward with a discretionary application. So those are things like subdivisions, parcel maps, conditional use permits, minor use permits, those types of things. and require that they annex in the CFD or otherwise. In one case, we did a kind of a fee in lieu of annexation for a very minor addition to a commercial project. Some some 14 projects of various sizes have been annexed into the district in the past 7 years, since 2017. And for the first 5 years or so, no money was attached or associated with it because those projects that were annexed weren't yet built. And the way the CFD works is the assessment charge itself doesn't land on the project until it's finalized. So just because it's annexed doesn't mean there's money coming in. The project has to be built, and then that built project has to be finalized, and then funds come in. And so about 4 years ago, we started collecting a very small amount of money, and then it's built up over time. Although we've not spent any of it, it's stayed within the CFD fund. And this year, actually about $75,000 for 23-24 is assessed and expected to become available. So it's grown, in 7 years, it's now about $75,000. At the time we originally formed it, it was thought that at build out, it could create about $1 million a year. But that's 30 or 40 years down the road. And we knew all along that the growth wouldn't be linear. There'd be periods of time when there'd be revenue growth, and then it might be relatively, might stay about the same. And then there'd be, periods of time when it would grow again. For both this discussion and an upcoming discussion on the fire committee meeting about or fire committee and for the district, just to understand what kind of funds are available, we had a request to develop kind of a more of a forecast of the CFD revenues beyond just the current year. And so our district engineer put this together. This is one of 3 pages of this. And the first chunk, the first page and a half or so, all of this page and the top half of page 2 are projects that have already been annexed. Those shown in white are already annexed and assessed, essentially. Make up, at least on the first page, make up about the $75,000 that we're expecting to receive this year. The projects in gray are viewed as imminent, close to having a building permit ready, or that's already ready but not yet constructed.
Excuse me, this is gray.
No, this for this top part gray. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
And then if you go to the second on the second page, these lower ones that are back into white again, not kind of a low gray. These could be a little further out, but they where there isn't necessarily revenue going to come in immediately or in the next year or two, but there's still a degree of confidence that it would move forward. They're in the system. Now, some of these we have, some of them have sort of gross estimates, like all the ones, all of the last 8 or so that say annexation or CFD number 7. That's a project that had a multiple lots that really nothing's happened on any of them. And so we just randomly assigned, okay, maybe some of this will be done by 2030, some 2040, some 2050. That could all happen much sooner or maybe never happen. So a little more speculative. But because there's no specific project that's come forward. All the other ones, there's a square footage that's known or a number of units that's known about the project.
So I have a question on this. So are you saying that we're figuring that we have the CFD revenue once a building permit has been finalized? Is that when it gets annexed?
It's annexed before the project is, it's annexed as a condition of approval for the project. So before a building permit's issued. But it's not assessed until until like a certificate of occupancy is issued, the building permit is finalized, basically until the project is complete.
Okay, so.
And then it's only assessed the following fiscal year. So if a project were to be complete tomorrow, for whatever reason, it would not be eligible for assessment until next fiscal year, a year from now.
Okay, so there's a number on the first page that are under building permit finalized or final. it's got exempt. And some of them are blank, one is expired. So I take it those that are exempt or expired or blank that we've not received CFD funds.
Or we don't expect to receive CFD funds
Okay,
for those. If there's not a dollar amount, there's no expectation of revenue associated with those, even though they're in the CFD. Many of them would have been
So they're-
parcels that had existing development on them that's not eligible for assessment, even though
Okay.
it was annexed into the CFD.
okay, so they're, okay,
So probably for the purposes of this discussion, the second column from the right where it shows estimated revenue, and this is of course in fiscal year 23-24 dollars, these go up based on the CPI each year. Is the column to kind of look at. So for the projects, so we know we're receiving about $75,000 in fiscal year 23-24. For the projects that we're not yet receiving money for, but are already annexed, there's about, in our estimation, $60,000 or so in additional revenue that will come annually, eventually. Not, some of it is a little distant out, but much of it we would think would be here before 2027. So there's some confidence that we'll have continued growth over the next few years, just based on what's in the pipeline today. The next segment here, and I'll call it peach for lack of a better description. I don't know what color this is, but it's a lighter color peach. These are projects that are known and that are being worked on and from one perspective or another that are not yet annexed. There will be a requirement to annex them, and if they proceed, they will annex. And some of these are expected to be completed, along the same time that the ones that are already annexed are in. And that totals about $95,000. All of which, except one, is pretty, it would occur between now and 2030. And again, this would become an annual revenue source. And then we've listed here, this is a few weeks old. We've listed here projects that are in pre-application phase or accounting referral phase, so that they're not as far down the process but there's still something happening on those sites. And because we know about them, we know the square footage, we were able to calculate annual revenue from those projects. This is that goldenrod color, maybe I'd call it. And that totals another $52,000 in CFD revenue. So all told, just looking at projects that we know about, not that they'll be completed in the next with a date certain, we have about $280,000 in annual revenue. Should all of these be built once they're all built. The dates are less, it's to a certain extent out of our control as about when projects will be constructed or when the assessment will take place.
I noticed you have East Bennett Village here on here. I thought they ended up winning and they don't have to pay. Is that river exempt? Is that not true?
So the project that doesn't have to pay is the one that's under where all the earthwork is taking place now, that hotel site and the properties around there, and it's not listed. This reference to East Bennett Village is a project that would have to annex. It's a newer entitlement, and it just actually received its entitlement from the planning commission like.
Oh, that's
last
the
week.
one across.
It's further, it's closer to the freeway.
the dirt isn't being moved yet.
Yes,
That's
it's
the one
really
that-
between Duncan and Bennett on the north
That's
side
the
of
one
Los
of our
Gatos.
neighbors over there are
Yes.
protesting. Okay. Got it.
So that, because it's an approved, that's probably, that's why Tina's assigned a date that's, not too far, 2027. Only, 4 years away from being completed or when revenue would be seen. Even though it's not yet annexed. We know that annexation would be a condition or a requirement prior to obtaining a building permit to approve. So nonetheless, as you think about just this sort of the long-term implications, that the district board will have some considerable discretion about how to spend this money. I would just caution you, to note that the funds are to provide services that are above and beyond what we provided in 2017. So for example, in my mind, the great first use of this funds is to support the asset replacement cost of a fire engine that didn't exist in 2017, but is expected to exist in the future. That we know is going to be challenging. We now have enough money. Just even if nothing happens from this day forward, we'll have enough money to cover that roughly $80,000 annual expense. If the CFD, if this first $80,000 in CFD revenue pays for that, and pays that additional cost in its entirety. But our expectations will be money beyond that that's available. Just how much at what point in time is still a little tricky, but this is kind of where we landed in terms of the forecast. So I know that was something that I just wanted, we had put this together, and because you were going to have this discussion, I wanted you to have that background information because the board will have some discretion about how those funds are spent. The next piece of information that was included in here is some analysis that we did 2 years ago, and so it's not new work, but because the board's discussion revolved around what were the impacts to various departments when the new cost allocation plan was implemented, and should there be a kind of a redistribution of the property tax revenue as a result of that. The two largest property tax beneficiaries are Parks and Recreation and Solid Waste and the fire fund. Back in 2 years ago, just kind of coming out of COVID, right after we merged the Parks and Recreation Fund with the Solid Waste Fund, there was a request by the Parks and Recreation Committee, and Wayne Peterson sat on that committee at the time, to do some analysis of where were we likely spending our property taxes when it came to Parks, Recreation, and Solid Waste. And so this data is 2 years old. We haven't modified it or changed anything. This was just because the work was already done. I wanted to make sure you had this background. And the committee had concluded this felt accurate, even though there wasn't necessarily any action taken because of it. So I think in a relative sense, maybe not to dollars and cents sense, but in a relative sense, it's likely still very accurate even today. We broke up, as you can see in the left-hand column, this column right here, the first one with numbers in it, that was the combined fund budget for fiscal year 21-22. We broke up those revenue sources and placed them in the corresponding categories, whether it's solid waste, parks and facilities, and rec programming. We broke up the cost. We did some cost analysis about where time was spent in Parks and Recreation, and broke up where salaries went and where various other expenses went. We don't have to go through this in any level of detail, but to balance this all out, essentially, what we showed what we determined at the time was, of the district's property taxes, the majority of the fund's property tax allocation, the majority, 277,000 of 350,000, so maybe 80% or something, was spent on parks and facilities, not on recreation, and this smaller $73,000 or so on rec programming. We have a duty and obligation to maintain our parks and facilities, even if we're not running programs there. So maintenance of Everest Park, maintenance of German Park, maintenance of the skate park, the community center, the community garden, the buildings themselves, the Lens Place, etc. Required that kind of commitment in property tax revenue to support those facilities 2 years ago. So again, I'm happy to try to answer questions. I just wanted to provide this in terms of background information, again, I'll say that I think the Parks and Rec Committee probably met 2 or 3 times to develop this analysis a couple years ago. And then finally, probably something that's more on point, or what you expect to see to support this discussion, is this kind of a historical breakdown of where have property tax revenues been spent or allocated over the years. So this little table is just a historical, goes back 30 years, just shows by percentage, not by dollars, because the dollars would have grown over time. Which funds property taxes were spent in over the past, like, I think it's like 32 years, but so you can see starting in the early 90s. Some of there's more columns here because some of the years there were direct allocations to the Youth Center Fund, which is no longer maintained as a budget unit. The Community Center Fund, which is no longer maintained as a budget unit. And then for a few of the years, the Admin Fund received direct property tax allocation, again in those early 2000s, even though it doesn't any longer. And then I would just note that really what's happened here is over the past decade plus, these years that are kind of highlighted here, there's been more stability. There hasn't been much volatility in the allocation of the property taxes. I can comment just real specifically on the change that took place between 2015 and 16 here. What we had found was the reason this change took place was at the time the Streetlight Fund had a growing balance and so there was an intentional move to reduce its allocation, spend down the balance in the Streetlight Fund, which provided a sort of a temporary additional funding to both fire and Parks and Recreation. And then once that fund balance was lowered and through these 4 years here, where it received a 1%, this was sort of reset, and the fund when the Streetlight Fund gained this 0.75% to kind of balance the fund out, these two funds split those. The fire and Parks and Recreation split that contribution or that loss, if you will, or so to speak. And then finally, and I know the intent of the request was to talk about allocation going forward, particularly as it affects fire and Parks and Recreation. I would just want to remind you or make sure you knew that we do forecast in the long term, years out, that both the Streetlight Fund will require a small increase in property tax allocation. The fund's demands will grow faster than the property tax revenue will grow based on the cost allocation plan. So it's a fairly similar impact in that regard. And then the Drainage Fund, not because of the cost allocation plan, but because of just a general deficit spending in the Drainage Fund, that it may require an allocation in the future unless we're able to get other sources of revenue into the Drainage Fund. So if we were to have a long-term forecast, my expectation would be that both of those two funds would eventually require some small shift, again in the under 1% type shift in property taxes to keep them whole in the distant years. So that's the background information we put together for this discussion. This committee hasn't really discussed this in the recent past, and we didn't have an expectation necessarily that you would arrive at any sort of decision or conclusion today, but wanted to provide this background information and then get a sense of what additional information that you would like us to pull together or model or forecast or whatever. And my recollection was that the request from the board to the committee was that by the end of the year you would have been prepared to make a recommendation as to if the allocation needs to change going forward, and if so, what would that allocation be?
So just a couple of comments, because I know what prompted this was when we were going through the budget and looking at the new allocation. That admin cost and the significant increase that impacted the fire department. So that was what was alarming, and I think what prompted it for me is the fact that if we're looking at how we're doing allocation of admin cost, it's an opportunity to say, let's open up the hood and see how we do the allocation on property taxes. And I think Park and Rec has been in a similar situation, such as the fire department in struggling with revenue. And I think to your credit, Melissa, you have done the fundraiser annually, which has really been successful and has in many ways filled that gap. The other is by having the franchise fees for solid waste coming into the Park and Rec budget. Much to the dismay of one of our constituents. And when was that done? What year was that? Was it 2020?
21, 22.
20, okay,
Yeah, actually, the board had made the decision to do it in early 2020, but then when COVID hit and everything was sort of thrown up in the air, we decided to press pause on that. And so it was not formally implemented until just 2 years ago.
okay. And that I think has also helped as well in looking at, if I'm not mistaken, the revenue for that based on this budget that you provided, that was $174,000.
Yeah, in that fiscal year, for the current fiscal year, speaking of solid waste franchise fees.
So that's been a huge, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's been a
in kind of filling the gap. Although personally, I'm not comfortable with relying upon the fundraiser, because I think at some point it's going to diminish. And so while we have a very generous community, I think that it is going to diminish. So there's, I think, got to be other creative ways of looking at that. My biggest angst is with the fire department, because when you look at the need for new fire truck, and there just not being the funds currently to secure that, even though we have put in the order, it's troublesome.
We haven't put it in the order.
Oh, we haven't put it in. Oh, we put it in the budget.
Yes.
Yes, we put it in the budget. But we still have, what was another huge surprise for the fire department was looking at the expansion that's needed for the fire department, for the structure. And that coming in double, pretty much double what we were anticipating. So $5 million, which just seems like it's, again, goes back to if I win the lottery, it gets done. So the odds of that are not really good. But I also want to have some kind of, CFD funds are fine. I think CFD funds in my mind are kind of like when we get to those years where we're really kind of not being able to fill the gap, we can use that to fill some of the gap. But I also want to have a rhyme and a reason as to why we have the allocation the way we have it. How is it being broken up, and what's the thought process behind how we're doing that allocation? This is good to look at historically, but I don't know what's driven the reasons why it's increased. And the drainage fund concerns me because that's running at a deficit. And that is a small subset of the community that should be paying for that. And I know that there's some issues in terms of being able to have the rates increased for that, for those individuals. But I want to have it to where we have some reason as to why we're doing this allocation the way we're doing it. And what's our kind of our position or policy as to why we're doing the allocation and divvying up those dollars, because the dollars are going to always be limited. It's never gonna be enough for park and rec and for fire. And for streetlights and for drainage, and I think over time, it's just gonna continue to shrink and shrink and shrink.
Yeah, the revenue will grow, but the problem is our costs likely grow
costs-
faster than the.
Yeah,
than
so
this
it's never
total
gonna
revenue
keep
growth.
pace with what the
It's
expenses
been
are.
growing at a rate of between like 4% and 5% for the past decade. So it's a decent clip, but in general, property taxes are viewed as a regressive or a lagging revenue source that your costs can grow faster and important, stable revenue source, but yeah, it's not likely to grow, we're not likely to grow revenue in parts in property taxes as fast as our expenses grow.
I would agree with that. So, and I'm concerned, I mean, if we start taking out, let's say 1% from park and rec. It's not enough to really kind of fill the gap for the fire department, we're talking about pins. So, but I wanna be able to say, here's kind of why we have this weighting, if you will, in terms of how we are allocating the property tax. What's kind of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, aside from our adopted budgets in the past, there's not a document that exists. We were able to find this historic information looking back at adopted budgets, and I
No, I
I
think
can
this is,
explain what occurred and why there was money in the youth center fund or the community center fund during various years and why that doesn't exist anymore. And I can confidently say what's happened over the last 10 years and why, and particularly with regard to that little shift in streetlights and then the shift back and those kinds of things. But in general, for the past 13 or so years, it's been very stable. It's been very stable, less than a 1% sort of change overall.
and the streetlights are not any of the private residents who have to pay for their own streetlights.
Well, there is, so the streetlight fund includes those subdivisions that have lighting assessment districts.
Okay.
And it also includes the general streetlights in the community that are not associated with lighting districts, like the ones we have on Main Street, where it's just a tax funded. There's no other revenue to pay for it other than property taxes. There is in some, a couple of cases, the rate that was established originally when the lighting assessment district was put together, a couple of cases likely that the assessment the costs exceed by a small margin what the maximum assessment amount is. So there was a dollar and cents amount assigned to every parcel in those cases and a maximum increase established at the time by the CPI. And when we went back and kind of recreated that, there were a couple of circumstances where our projected assessment would exceed that, and so our recommendation to the board was to assess just the maximum amount as established by the district when it was formed. And so there's in some cases a fairly small but a small subsidy that's occurring in those lighting districts because the costs, once we add in the cost allocation plan, now exceed for some parcels, not for an entire lighting district, but in some parcels. And I don't even remember what that was, a dollar or two or something. It was a very small amount on the parcels that it did impact.
And that was only the 23-24 budget when we added the admin
Once we added the admin.
allocation.
Because the admin out.
Yeah, admin allocation assigned admin costs to street lighting appropriately.
Yeah.
But it was not factored in previously, and so that did increase, that's part of the reason that we have a forecasting for some small increase in property taxes in the streetlight fund in the long term.
And so for those those properties that have their own streetlight assessment, can we increase their assessment?
You did.
We did.
You did. It's
Okay.
just subject to the original formation. Otherwise, you'd have to go back
Okay.
through a new Prop 218.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
So
that
when the
works.
assessment, the way this really works, the way this works is when the developer owns the project and they want to create this lighting assessment, a report is prepared that shows what the likely cost is per parcel and allocates it out. And then the property owner votes in favor to join that assessment district. Well, they do so when they own all the property, they control the vote. So if you were to want to increase it beyond what's allowed, and again, it goes up each year, the maximum assessment amount goes up each year by the CPR, it would require a new Prop 218 hearing. And unlike water and sewer rates, it would require an affirmative vote. It's unlikely to be achieved. The reality is, in this case, this problem is fairly small. Most of the parcels that we're able to assess were assessing the full cost, including cost recovery for the admin allocation.
Okay.
So the other costs, the sort of general streetlights, those just, that's what we pay PG&E for our main street. There's no assessment, and those costs go up. They go up, and we have property taxes that have always been sufficient to pay for them. Until now, there's this new admin allocation that didn't exist for that fund previously. So the majority of the new impacts to streetlight fund are as a result of the admin allocation plan implementation. And again, we're still talking about a fairly, I think it would, in the whole scheme of things, a relatively insignificant impact. I think when I wrote the budget document, the fund has a $2,200 deficit, and it's, you're not talking about right now. That's, like
I
something.
think it had a pretty healthy fund.
Yeah, it has 50 grand in the budget. So, but in the long term, the deficit is still relatively modest. It's, it would take something like going from 1.75% to 2% or something like that along those lines to get it to be balanced. It's not going to eat into a significant portion of the additional property tax revenue.
And then drainage fund, what's the deficit on that?
It's more significant, but the impacts of the admin allocation plan were just the opposite. The prior admin allocation actually had a bigger impact on the drainage fund than the new one does. We have about $33,000 in there, and our loss per year is about $6,200, $6,300. So, I mean, in the big picture, even if you were saying, hey, we need to solve these, we can't leave this room until we know these are solved, even though they're not related to tomorrow's problems, it's like $10,000 or less in total. It's not a needle moving thing. Every dollar matters, but this is not a significant sum of money one way or the other in the big picture. We're trying to allocate, we talk about property tax allocation, and I'm citing current year dollars for both those two small deficits. The current year property tax allocation, the money the district receives for property taxes totals maybe I'm missing that page.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, it's page 13 and it's missing my little budget, so apologize for that, but we can do a quick.
You can go grab it real quick.
Quick math here. Yeah, it's not. Budget. So.
Looking at the verbiage here on the agenda too, I'm not sure that I'm ready to make a recommendation on, let's, mess with the numbers per se, because I'm more interested in, Yeah.
That's it, 1.5 million, 1.505 million.
okay,
That's what the current year property tax allocation is district wide.
1.5.
1.505. 753. we wanna get into the weeds.
Yeah, I'm more interested in, because otherwise, I mean, because we would start. Again, moving numbers without any rhyme or reason. I'm more interested in saying, what's kind of the allocation based upon some methodology. Be it, you know, the sources of revenue and the expenses on each of the departments and having it weighted as such. Something that is at least, we can say in a policy, this is how we're allocating and why we're doing that allocation.
So right now, I mean, I would argue that historically it's been based on the need, you know, and maybe it didn't fulfill the need in its entirely, right? We spent better than a decade trying to figure out a way to provide 24
So it's just moving it for that reason.
But yeah, you know, it's been done historically and it's been changed a little bit, as you can see over these 30 years, but there's not there doesn't exist today a policy or a guideline that that someone could look at and say, oh, now I see how the district assigns the property taxes. I mean, I think for the past 12 or so years, it's been very stable. There's been a lot of changes. It's been we've carried forward in terms of building the budget, those percentages of allocation, they've grown, right? Every year we've received a little bit more in property taxes. And so it's been again, a growing, not a fast growing, but a growing revenue source. So if there was gonna be a guidance policy or something that would, you know, help determine how the allocation were made, we need to start from kind of scratch.
Okay.
Do we know how, excuse me, do we know how it originally got sent?
Well, the allocation or the,
The allocation?
yeah, we were only able to find this far back. I mean, the district did receive property taxes all the way back upon its formation in the 70s.
Right.
But at the time, we only provided one tax funded service in terms of fire, that was fire. But over the years, different services were added to the district, all prior to the 90s, you know. I don't know if our document, I don't know if we're confident that we can find budgets that go back.
Okay, I was just,
Yeah, I couldn't find anything back further than 92.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the first, 20 years, it looks like it's fluctuated quite a bit. I mean, between 69, 60, 63, 65, 65, 66, 69, and then it kind of stabilizes at 71. And then it goes to 72 and then 72 and a half. And then it's dropped back down 72.125.
Yeah, like I said, I'm absolutely confident I can explain what happened between 72, 72 and a half, and 72.125, but before that,
Well, I know what happened is because it was Park and Rec, I think had such a shortfall. And the expenses, I think that's where we said we needed to give, we give it over to streetlights.
yeah, actually really hasn't been.
We took from both Park and Rec and Fire to give to streetlights.
Well, we originally assigned less to streetlights, which benefited Parks and Rec and Fire.
Yeah.
And then once that achieved once we burned some balance of the streetlight fund, divvied up a smaller portion out of both Parks and Rec and so that, you know, if you compare what occurred between 2011 and 12 and 2014 and 15, where it was stable at 72% to fire. And then if you look at the most current year, 2019, the most current batch of the last 6 years or so, 2019 to 2024, we're at 72.125. That was really that jump.
Yeah.
Although it went higher initially, it was really a big because we used less money in streetlights. And again, now that we've got that, I will tell you in the long term, there's going to have to be some very minor correction along those lines to get the streetlight fund to be in balance, you know, within about 5 years. But again, it's a small little, it's a tweak, not a big policy shift to make that work.
Well, and even going back to 72.5 is not gonna make a difference. It's not enough in the way of money, given the property taxes. When we're looking at the impact fees for fire, when was it that we did the Park and Rec impact fees? Was that in?
2018.
Yeah, okay. that seems like it was longer. Okay. So.
So just so you, when you think about these numbers, for every 1% in today's dollars is like $15,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, you say, so 1% means not that significant, it's not, but every, it's $15,000.
Okay, well, I've said my piece. I don't know if Eric, you have any comments, or Wayne?
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said, and I don't wanna reiterate on all, I agree that maybe we should have something that explains how we have these, but that's a tough call. And I'm not sure we could ever come up with something that would satisfy everybody, and when you look at the county as a whole, somebody, the powers to be, came up with this percentage for every city or community service district. And if we're gonna go playing around with how we allocate it, it's going to maybe react or affect or be different than the original. I'm just not sure that what you're asking for can be done. Sure, we could probably do it and say, okay, based on the stats for the last how many ever years you want to go, this is what it shows. But then 5 years from now, we're probably gonna have to go and do that. So I also agree that I am not ready to make this decision. I mean, I don't think we need to make the decision on the overall tax at this point in time. I think we've talked in the past about probably the money that we get with the facility service district is gonna go, for the time being, go to the fire department. I'd be all for that. But again, I'm not in favor of changing this right now. So that's kind of where I come from. Eric, you
don't see any drastic shortfalls in as far as the allocation is concerned, it's kind of just continuous until we see something radically different.
Let me ask a hypothetical, and close your ears, Tom. But if the fire department should not be sustainable, and if we were to disband the fire department, how would the county look at our allocation in any way?
Yes, I think so. So we did have some preliminary discussions with LAFCO, back 5 years ago, when we were evaluating options. And at the time, David Church thought that LAFCO and the county would examine how the district, where the district spent its tax dollars, and we would likely lose the tax dollars that are assigned to the area, that if we were to relinquish that service, that we would lose those revenues. Now, it never got into a point of a contractual thing, and even looking at other, or something that was very seriously pursued, and even looking at other agencies that are in the process of doing this, like say Oceano is doing so right now. They've got an application pending with LAFCO to make their fire powers inactive, and they expect to lose all of their property taxes as a result. But that's because they've been spending all of their property taxes on the fire service, as opposed to splitting them up over multiple services. As we.
So they have no park and rec that they've been
But is
allocating it to?
what happened, as I understand it, you correct me if I'm wrong, but they gave up Parks and Rec to fund to save the fire department. Well, once they gave it up, they're never gonna get that back.
Yeah.
And now they couldn't sustain the fire department even by giving it rec, which I look at here. And so now that they're gonna lose the fire department too, they've got zero, so they're not gonna have a rec department or a fire department.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't know that they ever deactivated that power, but they didn't put any funding towards Parks and Recreation services. And again, I don't know the real specifics, but by and large, in the case of Oceano anyway, they're expecting to lose all of their property taxes when the fire service goes to the county, or however that gets worked out. It's still in a pending status. But I don't know, we don't have a test case to really look at, so any real certainty. to look at. Is it possible that, that we'd lose more than we've, I suppose. But I don't, quite frankly, just don't know that. I don't think anybody does, because we haven't seen an agency that provides services like the we do. We're
Yeah,
way
we're so
different than
unique,
most of
yeah.
the special districts.
Yeah, because Cayugas wouldn't even be.
Cayugas was, there was a single.
Yeah.
When Cayugas Fire existed, it only did one thing. It was a fire protection district as opposed to part of a larger organization. So, yeah, and then, I don't know, to carry it even further, I don't know. I don't know if any of our CFD funds would be at risk in that scenario. I mean, those are things we just really haven't seriously contemplated, certainly since the passage of Measure A anyway. So it hasn't been something that I've done any work on or research on in the past, for many years.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all the information that you've provided. I would agree. I don't see a need to, to start moving the percentages, the allocation. As much as I think the fire department was hurt by the admin cost increase, I'm not sure that I want to start just fudging with numbers blindly. So.
I would suggest that this committee recommend the board that we leave it like it is for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, so
without-
I guess one thing to think about is you're not bound, right? This is your and future board's decision to how this is allocated.
Right.
You can make a change anytime, but and you actually have a lot of discretion about how you spend. It's kind of interesting.
But
You
I
have
do
a lot of
agree-
discretion on how you spend taxpayer dollars, much more so than enterprise fund.
Yeah, but I do agree that the CFD funds at this point, I think, need to be allocated towards the fire department.
That
and
should
help
probably
fund
be
the
part of
fire
his
department.
recommendation.
Yeah.
That we're gonna make to the board. I would
Yeah.
like to see that, I guess.
I guess in my mind, I'm looking at what we're preparing for as a short-term new need in fire is, we were asked to demonstrate how we were gonna be prepared to pay for the asset replacement cost increase associated with a new engine. Even though we don't know exactly when that would hit, it's still maybe couple years down the road. It kind of depends on when the asset is booked into our system. But I would want there to be an expectation. I mean, my expectation is if we're gonna do that, I need to make sure the first $80,000 annually of the CFD is dedicated to that cost. And to me, it's a very defensible use of the funds.
I would agree.
I would agree.
Yeah. I think that should be the recommendation.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay. You got enough information?
So I think there was some talk about developing a guiding policy. Is that all just something for long-term or is the committee then, I mean, is your suggestion that would go back to the board at some point here would be that the property tax allocation remain as is for the foreseeable future or until things change, and that, but in addition, the first $80,000 of the CFD revenue be dedicated to fire for the purposes of funding asset replacement on a new engine. And then future CFD, money beyond that, not future CFD, but the 81,000 and beyond is subject to further exploration.
I'd also like to see that it, on that recommendation, that it come back to the Administrative Finance Committee every year for review.
That would come back for review?
The recommendation, we look at it every year.
The problem.
And the committee.
Yeah, so you're doing that by default, when you review the budget, it's just we haven't spent a lot of time of, up until now, we've kind of haven't touched the CFD funds. They're building in its own fund, and it's there for future years, and you haven't changed the allocation, but could at any time.
I understand what you're saying, but I think there's some people that wanna, I just wanna make sure that it's obvious to those out there that aren't familiar with the budget process, that we will be reviewing it on an annual basis, so.
I would agree with that.
So. Yeah. Hopefully.
I think so. If you'd like, I can write up write up a statement or something that would, that would be the formal recommendation and bring it back to you or a future meeting or?
Well, it's the first is keeping the allocation as is. The second is allocating the first 80,000 of CFD funds to fire for the fire truck. And then the third is that the CFD revenue forecasts is reviewed annually by the Finance and Admin Committee.
Before we go any further, Tom, Melissa, do you guys have anything you want to add or say?
Well, Park and Rec helps pay for CFD to be created. Just a reminder, 25% of property tax.
Maybe.
No, I would just say, with regards to what Director Logan talked about earlier was, something that could create a bit of a firestorm, if we start even talking about the fire department going away, after Measure A and all of that. And
I
Measure
would-
A within
I just did that as a hypothetical.
I know, but Measure A within itself is something that would obviously go away, in that.
Those funds. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a given.
Yes. So the whole,
So let me just reiterate, make sure I have what was stated, okay. The property tax allocation for 24-25 is expected to remain as is. The first $80,000 annually in CFD revenue is expected to be transferred to the fire fund to cover the asset allocation, new asset allocation requirements for the depreciation cost on a new engine. And that the CFD revenue and expenses beyond $80,000 would be reviewed annually by this committee for a recommendation to the board as a part of the annual budget.
Correct.
correct, yeah.
Okay, let me document that just again, because I think there's gonna be some interest in reviewing your deliberations here, and because, this committee is gonna be meeting again through the audit process. I can just bring it back, make sure we've captured everything. I don't make this more complicated than it needs to be, but I wanna make sure that you all had a chance to just agree that that's where you stand. And then it can be forwarded to the board, and, that will have satisfied the request of the board's motion I think, on this topic. At least for now, knowing that, really, quite honestly, the board has the discretion at any time to change the allocation of the property taxes, and quite frankly, the CFD as well, although it's gonna be, the way I'm viewing it is the only, we have this goal of getting another engine. And we need a new dedicated revenue source to pay for its asset replacement. This, in my mind, the CFD is it.
Well, and yeah, I would agree.
Yes.
And as General Manager Grill said, the problem we're having right now, so even if we get through the fees and with this allocation, and let's say we come back to the board in end of September, early October to say, okay, the 450,000 plus this needs to be allocated and we need to go out for the engine in October, we're still looking at roughly 28 months to 30 months before we see that engine come off the line.
Yeah.
And in some instances, it's taken even longer, up to 38 months.
And there's no doubt, I think that's our priority, is that fire engine. That's the priority. And in my mind, CFD funds are gonna be it. So,
Our needs may dictate that we, have to make a decision that's less than ideal with regard to the engine and whatever, just because, it may not be in a position to comfortably wait 3 years.
I did go to Congressman Panetta's open house, and as I shook his head, I said, I hope you're able to get that fire truck for us.
Thank you for doing so.
And I had my little label on my little tag here and he says, yeah, he goes, hopefully we can get that. And so, fingers crossed, I said, cause we
Yeah.
really, really need that.
Well, while you're on that topic, and this isn't really on the, but we are talking about just the cost, so, we do have this congressional request to have a community project. For the engine. And we submitted a request for something like $1.4 million, which was the engine and outfitting it, some new gear, things that would be on the engine. So kind of a fully loaded expense, taxes and whatever. We learned, learned into that process not too long after that. We're probably gonna be capped at $1 million. And then since then, it's been like, maybe it's gonna be less than that. I made the same request of Congressman Panetta when I saw him on Thursday. And he assured me they're still fighting for it, although we don't expect to get the full amount. And then our contact, and I mentioned what I mentioned to the committee, our contact with his office is legislative director Mark Denon, who works in Washington, DC. He's actually gonna be making a visit to the district next Thursday. And I was gonna ask if the board president maybe would be available. I think that's at 10:30.
Next Thursday?
Next Thursday. We just secured that appointment time Friday. Again, just to reiterate the importance of this request. Mark Denon, that's how he knows us, is through our community projects request. So I thought it was interesting and maybe a little too coincidental that I visited with Panetta on Thursday, you visited with Panetta on Thursday, and Mark Denon reached out to us Friday to see.
Well, and I was visiting on a dual role. I was as a tax aide, AARP tax aide, because he's been involved with that. And helping out with the IRS and some of the things that we do, because we brought back close to $2 million back to North County by the tax filings that we filed for low income and seniors. But yeah, so and also, I think it would also be a real feather in his cap since we're new to his district. If he can secure that for us.
Absolutely. I think it's a
It's a
It's a
win-win.
one-time opportunity to get some attention out of
Yeah.
his office, because this is a new territory.
Yeah.
And we don't know, here's the thing, is we don't know what rules, there will be rules.
Yeah.
Are associated with that. There will not be a check of $500,000 or $1 million that said spend it as you like. It'll be through a federal grant program that will have lots of rules and constraints about how we obtain the equipment. So
We'll do the
that,
backflips.
we'll probably, it'll have to.
Natalie can handle it.
American Steel and all that stuff.
FEMA.
Well, it is.
That's exactly what I
mean too.
There were
So
hoops to jump through to
Yeah.
get the. to get the
I
money.
think we're willing to jump through those
Absolutely,
hoops.
we're good. Can't jump that high, but I will try.
That'd be a boost.
We will be buying a foreign fire engine,
A what?
a
Before-
foreign fire engine.
Okay. The next item on is the audit update.
Yeah, for these next few items, Tom, Melissa, you are welcome to stay and participate. But
Oh,
under no
God.
obligation.
Damn.
All right, be that way.
I would enjoy
Oh, I
it.
got that way.
Soccer community banging on my door.
And we do have boys en route up to the Northern California fires, so,
That's
Oh,
right, there.
Boys and
and girl.
men and ladies.
and ladies. Fire personnel.
there you go.
So we wanted to provide just a quick update on the auditors, which is gonna be very quick, actually. Not because we're able to be super succinct, because we just don't know a heck of a lot. As the committee will recall, we had a long-term relationship with the audit firm of Leaf and Cole. And had got to know their process and schedule and how they worked and thought pretty well. And so even if and by this time of the year, we would have already been kind of knee deep, maybe not directly, but exchanging.
3/4 of them.
Yeah, been exchanging information. That arrangement expired at the end of the last fiscal year's audit. you'll recall that you guys, this committee reviewed the proposals and then we later selected an audit firm. Nigro and Nigro. And the board awarded a contract to Nigro and Nigro. It did take us a little while to get them under contract, several weeks. And we've since, I want to say maybe a month ago, have the audit. I'm trying to drawing this a very short break of what the letter's called, engagement letter. The audit engagement letter has been executed and assigned. And Natalie's received some correspondence with Nigro, but we've not really started the fiscal year audit. I guess I'll say what Natalie's been preparing.
I'm preparing
Preparing
like
for it.
I would have prepared in the past.
But we haven't had a request to review a lot of information just yet. We have a meeting slated with the audit team next Thursday, right after Mark
Yeah, the
Denon
31st.
is here, hopefully, all works out like that. Sometime around midday, the group is traveling from something in Monterey
CSDA.
and stopping here and to meet with us, and so we'll know more then. But right now, we don't have a schedule as to when the field work, when any preliminary work will happen or when field work will be. We do expect this audit team to be more remote prepared. Even actually, our last one was too. It really, we only saw them for like 36 hours or something, a day and a half kind of thing here. So that's what we're at. No cause for concern, just maybe Natalie's a little concerned, but I think that they're just
Natalie's got to work a little over.
Well, but didn't they
No.
provide a preliminary schedule, kind of a straw man in terms of how they would approach doing the
See, I,
annual audit?
They did, but I don't think.
they did, but it wasn't.
Well, it was a straw man.
Yeah, it wasn't really detailed that I
No.
date specific or
recall.
something.
It wasn't date specific. I mean, they could be,
So we requested that for next Thursday's meeting.
No, they're treating this more like an introductory kind
yeah,
of thing.
it's just like they're driving by and saying hi. to
Yeah,
somebody.
I'm hoping we'll push them for more information, because we wanna move forward. I guess what I will take in my experience, this agency gets its books closed and its audit done really rapidly. And in most local agencies, it doesn't happen that fast. The book closure maybe doesn't even take place till September, and then the audit might take place over the course of the winter. That was not so much a result of our own needs, but Leaf and Cole's desire to close it out and move on to other clients. And it worked with Natalie's schedule, and we were able to make that happen on a quick basis. So I think that might not be the way that we can expect Nigro to perform, but that's not a knock on them, and it will have really no impact in the long term. There are some things that are due, like we owe a state controller's report in January, so we have to have most of this stuff done in order to complete that, or ask them to complete it.
Yeah, they completely, yeah.
So there are things, we'll have to be along, but we likely will not be able to have like financial statements to you in October or November, and that's
I
okay.
think I put in the proposal that they needed to have it to us by the end of October.
Draft statements or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, I
Well, we'll
thought there
see.
was something about some timelines that were referenced in that RFP.
I mean, it just might be, I'm with Leaf and Cole, as I finished items. They took it and they reviewed it right away, whereas, this company might be more like, well, they'll just wait till I'm completely finished. And maybe they have more people to dedicate it, to looking at it. I don't know, but we'll
Well, it
have
might
more
be good
information.
for next Thursday's meet and greet to set some expectations.
Yeah.
We just wanna understand what, so that it'll just pepper Natalie and like, oh, okay, we're gonna do all the work tomorrow, so we need everything by the end of the day or something like that. So one thing that was unique about Leaf and Cole is really we had for the entire engagement with them, more than a decade, one point of contact for that received all the information, and then an audit lead that did work for a day and a half. And then maybe did some review of the final paperwork. It was basically just Neil that was the recipient of all of the documents. And I think that's a little unusual, because he spent time over a course of a couple months,
Yeah,
as opposed to, hitting it hard and getting it done in a few weeks or something with a larger group. You might recall, we had some one of the proposers, not one that we selected, had like, they were gonna have a team of 6 people
Yeah,
doing the field work, so. I don't know where we were
it
gonna
would only
accommodate
take
6
them
people,
like 2 days.
so.
Again, when you're dealing with a CPA firm, you're dealing with what they want,
Yeah.
not what our expectations.
So
So,
I'm just
I think it's
figuring
good
I'm
to
gonna
set
have,
our expectations though.
yeah, I'm treating it like every year in the past, I'm gonna have it all done by second week of September and
Yeah,
let them know I'm
no,
done. and-
I don't think there's any cause for concern here at all. I just, wanted to let you know that that's what we were, kind of, waiting on and I have no reason to believe that things won't go great. Do keep in mind that this committee, it has historically, and I expect will do so the same, meet with the audit team at the end of the field work, but prior to the issuance of draft financial statements and receive a direct download from the auditors about what they found, including, maybe things to look out for.
well, that was in the RFP, right?
Yes.
As I recall, so.
I think it was, with this group, that might be something that they do via Zoom with us. I don't know.
And it
This-
might be later than.
Yeah, the last few years have been like mid-September.
Yeah,
So-
I'm thinking it'll probably be later than that.
We will coordinate with you as soon as we know when that's going to be, so that we can make sure, we can ensure your availability or do our best to ensure your availability. In the past, we've really not had much flexibility because it was always done at the end of the morning, at the second day of field work. And either you were gonna be here at 11 or noon, or they were gonna be gone, because they were here again, one full day, one like a Monday and half it, and 2/3 of a Tuesday, and that was it. So, but I think this might work out a little more, might have a little more flexibility.
Okay. Any questions? Okay.
Okay, we wanted to review with you some of these, some proposed personnel guideline amendments since we had this committee meeting. Some of these things are, most of them are very minor clarifications, but we wanted to get your input on them. And what we've got here are excerpts out of the personnel guidelines, not the entire document, and the red lines show the proposed revisions. And we can walk you through these at whatever extent you'd like. This issue with work schedule comes into play with the full-time firefighters. When we originally went to 24-hour staffing, that's when that's when our captains went to 24-hour shifts. And originally our engineer was working 4 10s. So they have different shifts. And so the personnel guidelines were written in such a way that it could accommodate kind of either assignment, either a 24-hour shift or a day shift assignment. And we actually have 2 rates of pay for these full-time fire employees to deal with either of the scenarios. And essentially what it is the rate of pay for a day shift is higher, so that if the employee were to work a 40-hour shift, they'd make the same amount of money as if they worked an average of 56 hours. That's already taken into consideration. This issue about when their normal shifts are assigned to what rate of pay is applicable deals with when an employee comes off of the 24-hour shift and onto a day shift for, let's say, like a week-long training program. Or let's say they had an industrial injury and they were given an administrative assignment, they would come off of a 24-hour shift. And so that clarifies when that would occur. It's also to clarify, so that way the employee and the district, as there's more clarity here. This is how we've been implementing it, but we wanted to incorporate it into the personnel guidelines.
And is it defined what their higher day shift rate is?
Yes, it's on their personnel action.
Okay,
And it's adopted in your budget, in your wage schedule.
Okay.
This next section, these are not necessarily related issues. The next section, but they're in order of how they appear in the personnel guidelines. The next section is under dress code. And this really deals with with something we implemented about a year ago. you might recall that we started funding a uniform service for our utilities and parks staff, field staff. Prior to that, employees were given $250 a year, not given, had a allowance of $250 a year to maintain safety footwear and clothing. And we had a varying degree of compliance, that's probably the wrong word, of anyway, we ended up with circumstances where employees would wear like a logoed shirt to the point where it was very worn out, holes, faded, you know, et cetera. They well past its expiration date. So to help with the professionalism and with regard to some safety issues like having the clothes commercially washed so that some safety hazards that you might find in wastewater weren't ending up at the house employee's home laundry machine, washing machine, sorry. Do you know where ours is? And I have used it. We provided this dress, this uniform program. So at the time, at that same time, we reduced the allowance from $250 to $200 just to deal with shoes, like a boot, it's a boot allowance essentially. But we failed to codify it in the personnel guidelines, and so we still had employees requesting reimbursement for pants and stuff like that. And so this change essentially just completes the implementation of the change that the district made last year with uniform services.
And they look very nice. I saw them at the staff.
Yeah, yeah.
appreciation. They really.
Yeah, the shirts look good and it's, they're, yeah, more
How did- how did-
recognizable.
How did the rec department get involved in that?
Parks,
Parks.
we just included our park, it's available to all the field crew.
Okay.
This next section's under holidays. This is really there's a lot here, but I'll try to make it really simple. This has everything to do with PERS and nothing else. PERS is very strict about when a holiday is subject to special compensation. Special compensation means it's pensionable compensation. It's a real technicality. When we implemented the holiday pay for full-time, for our fire employees, when we went to 24/7 staffing, it was clear they weren't going to take holidays off. We were a 24/7 operation. And so we proposed to pay employees the amount of holiday pay that they would have normally received in addition to their compensation. So it's like a paid holiday on top of the holiday of working. That's what was implemented several years ago. We have a floating holiday. The district has a floating holiday for all employees, and it just doesn't work for the fire employees because, again,
Can we just say a floating holiday is also credited to each regular employee, full-time employee, instead of saying as well as?
yes, we can.
Okay.
You make a note of that. So the issue really is, in this whole thing, is to clarify that the floating holiday, it's that April 1st is not a floating holiday for firefighters. We signed April 1st as a fixed holiday, but PERS has a little dispute because it cannot be associated with a floating holiday and still be considered special compensation. So for firefighters, it's April 1st, and for everybody else, it's a floating holiday. So this is also not a change that will affect any employee in any way. This is how we've been doing it and how we've been implementing it. It's just a clarification so that when PERS audits us, they won't be so angry, at least on this topic. And this is all this language under here deals with the same issue. This issue under vacation time is real simple. Some years ago, we just administratively changed that vacation slips don't, for my non-direct reports, they don't need to come to me. I mean, Justin approves vacation for his crew and Melissa for her team, it's Natalie for her team, etc. So we're just striking this reference here. Sick leave, this is really an issue, this is a couple of issues here. When sick leave became a requirement for all California employees, including part-time non-benefited employees several years ago, we added provisions to comply with the sick leave law. And those provisions allowed us to limit the accrual of sick leave to part-time employees to up to 24 hours a year, but they could accrue 2 years worth essentially on the books, have up to 48 hours on the books. And they were not eligible to use the sick leave within, for the first 90 days. And if they leave and return within a year, they get whatever they had on the books at the time. That's essentially what that state law says. Well, what we found is our payroll system really doesn't like some of those rules, and so we didn't fully adhere to what was in the personnel guidelines. And so we're trying to adjust the personnel guidelines to match how the payroll system works. And the significant changes are it eliminates the maximum use of 24 hours per fiscal year. First of all, we found that wasn't very applicable or fair to our firefighters who could work. A part-time firefighter could work one shift that was 48 hours, 2 back-to-back days. That's a normal or not an uncommon assignment. If they missed one shift due to illness, it would take 48 hours. So the 24-hour limit didn't work for firefighters. And that essentially we haven't been tracking this 90 days of employment. And so there have been instances when part-time employees have taken sick leave before the 90th day of employment. And so this adjustment really alters the written policy to match the existing practice. If anything, it's a little more favorable to the employee.
Well, otherwise, it seems like you would have people coming in who are sick.
We could, and just keep in mind that we don't have a lot of, well, in 2022, we had 117 employees. We only have 23 full-time employees. So we've got like 95 part-time employees over the course of the year. Now, many of them are Parks and Rec workers who work, they're like youth sports officials. That's gonna be 2/3 of that number, something like that. These folks don't generally use any of this sick leave. They all have accrual, it'll be an hour and a half or 2 hours. The whole course of the season, they only work 3 hours a day for 8 weeks. Some of them work back to back. So there's just really no issue with sick leave with that employment pool. We've got reserve firefighters that make up the vast majority of the remainder. And then we have a couple of like 3 regularly scheduled year-round employees that are part-time that fall into these categories. That have been here for several years. Well, one of them not so much because he's a parks maintenance worker who we brought on in March, but the others have been long-term district employees that accrue these benefits. So that's a summary of these changes. I'm happy to try to answer any questions. If not, we would look for your recommendation that these be brought forward to the board for formal incorporation. None of them are significant.
Comments? Eric?
Nope, I'm in support of the changes.
I'm supporting the changes. Okay. Future agenda items.
Well, we have the audit, so I think that's gonna be something that,
I think that's already probably planned.
Yeah, we expect the audit, and I would recommend that we include whenever you meet next, this sort of recommendation about how you deal with property taxes and to a lesser extent well, maybe not lesser, but also the CFD and what's expected. So, and by the way, the fire committee will be reviewing this CFD forecast as well, just so they know what's coming, because they requested something similar. Or a member of that committee had requested.
Okay, that's it. Any comments?
No, not this time.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you all.
Adjourn meeting.